Hi, I'm Peter Cammons. I'm chair of the UK Personal Construct Psychology Association, known as PCPA. This video is the fifth in a series the PCPA is producing to demonstrate some of the contributions that personal construct psychology can make to understanding other people. In video 5, we're going to look particularly at Professor Harry Procter's work in developing the relational aspect of personal construct psychology, and in particular the use of dyadic and triadic grids. I'm very pleased to have Harry with me here to demonstrate what he has developed.
Thanks very much, Peter. Thanks for asking me again. Okay, in this session, you'll recall that we talked earlier about Kelly's sociality corollary. That is the corollary that as he calls these statements that he makes, about getting into the shoes of another person. So what he's saying is that in relating to people, it's very important to understand how they see the world, or to construe how they see the world. It may not necessarily be a good understanding, actually. It could be something that the other person would say, no, I don't see it that way at all. But in order to understand how somebody is approaching another person, and how they're making decisions about how they act with that person, they must take into account a construction of the other person's construing. Does that make sense?
It just about makes sense.
Yes.
But sometimes I think people have a real struggle with that idea of standing in the other person's shoes.
Yes.
And I think that's something that some of your work on dyadic and triadic elicitation has helped to clarify.
Well, maybe, because what I've really been developing in the last couple of years is a critique of the sociality corollary. I think it's a very good statement, and it takes us a long way. Incidentally, it goes back in history as well. I mean, George Herbert Mead is the person that's probably most influential on Kelly in formulating that. But in fact, it only really talks about one other person. So the way it's, I'll just read it. It's to the extent that one person construes the construction processes of another, he or she may play a role in a social process involving that other person. But the implication there is it's just one person. And certainly in studying families and those kind of ongoing groups, it's not really adequate, or in fact any group process is not really adequately covered by just one other person. You could say if you're relating to several people, you're doing sociality, as it were, with each one. You're thinking, where are each one coming from? But you've actually got to take into account, I'm arguing, in how those people are relating to each other. So that's where the idea of relational stuff comes in. So for instance, if you're talking to two people, it makes a great deal of difference whether you construe them as being in agreement with each other, those two people,
right,
or whether you construe them as disagreeing. You know, that's a very crucial thing, isn't it? Or another construct there would be, how much do they understand each other? You know, if you felt one was really misunderstanding the other, it would inform your actions, possibly to try and help that person understand better, or something like that. Okay. So the relationality corollary, which I used to call the group corollary, but this seems a slightly more precise way of describing it, is to the extent that a person construe the relationships between members of a group, he or she may take part in a group process with them. Okay. So let's just look at a diagram where a person is construing two people, A and B.
Okay.
Okay. So on the diagram, the little bow tie arrows, by the way, looks a bit like a bow tie, doesn't it? Describe how in any relationship people are construing the other person's action and then acting in accordance with that construing. So if you think somebody's being very angry towards you, for instance, you may or may not construe that, and then you'll behave in accordance with that.
Right.
Okay.
And in fact, of course,
that's sociality.
But that's yet another video to be made at another time about the use of systemic bow ties, but we won't go down that road right now.
Okay. But I've included that in this diagram.
Yes.
So here's a person trying to make sense of what's happening between A and B. And the kind of constructs that they use to describe a relationship are going to be very different from just describing an individual person. Okay, I've got another little table here where some examples of the constructs that you use to describe an individual, for example, outgoing, bad-tempered, tidy, stubborn, doesn't try hard enough, bright, all these sort of descriptions of an individual. In the old personality trait language, if you like, you know, are descriptions of emotional states and all the rest of it.
Right.
And those can be applied to more than one person. But if you tried applying a relational construct, for instance, interested in each other, to just one person, that doesn't make sense. It's illogical, isn't it? So I've already mentioned agreeing and disagreeing. So they're descriptions of two people, okay? What I would call dyadic constructs. Another one, understanding, misunderstanding. One person putting another person down, so sort of hierarchical things happening there. And the last two examples there are, she treats me just like my mother did. Okay, let's say a person's talking about their wife. Oh, my wife treats me just like my mother did. That actually involves three people. Another example is a child saying, oh, my mum's unfair. My brother was given more than I was, you know, the old sibling rivalry idea. So those are construing of three-person situations, what we might call triadic.
Okay.
Okay. Now going back to the person construing two people, we can also say, of course, that that person may be one of the two people. So in this diagram we can see A and B relating to each other in the usual sociality way, making sense of what the other person's actions and behaviour are telling them. But they're also construing at this relational level. So if we take you and me, for instance, we're both construing at a relational level, as well as construing each other as individuals. Okay, so we're probably both feeling, oh, this is a pleasant conversation that we're having, you know, we're both interested in the same thing. Those sort of judgments about the relational state. And when that becomes disturbed, if somebody, an expression comes over the face of, you know, disapproval or something like that, you might think, oh, something's happening at the relational level. Maybe he's disagreeing with me, or maybe he doesn't like something that I've said.
Or if I go,
yes,
but
he's getting bored with me, you know. So these are incredibly fine judgments that we're making all the time. And in fact, the brilliant theorist Gregory Bateson argued that these things even happen with animals. So, you know, animals, for instance, are capable of pretending to play, you know, pretending to fight. Okay, they're not genuine fight, but they pretend to fight. So that's something about the process, the patterning, the relationship actually happening between us and the construing of that.
Okay, so that's dyadic.
So those dyadic construals are very, very crucial in group process, and we can now summarize that on this slide that I have. Monadic construing, that's a construing about, me construing about a person A, just an individual. Could be they're friendly to me or they're critical. Could be they're dangerous versus vulnerable. I use that example when you're walking down the street and you see somebody coming the other way, maybe they look a bit drunk or something. And without even knowing them at all, without knowing who they are, how they make sense of the world, you're judging them as either somebody to be avoided or somebody to be helped. And that's, you know, ethical decision. In dyadic construing, we're construing A and B. So those two people are being very polite to each other versus they're just, those two people are very honest with each other, or that actually it's just politeness. Okay, they're pretending to be friendly to each other, that's something like that. Or the example I just gave of play fighting versus a genuine conflict.
Okay.
But we do need, I think, a triadic level too, because even those dyadic ones aren't good for really understanding the complexity of what can happen between three people. So in the triadic construing, for instance, A and B are making fun of me, okay, versus respecting me.
Right. Yeah.
So that's a judgment of a triad between three people, of which I am one of the three.
Mm.
So maybe I'm in a school playground, and these two people are kind of, you know, getting to the point of beginning to be suspicious that they're actually taking the mickey out of me.
Right.
Okay, and that's a judgment I have to make. I construe that between this three-person system, there's mickey taking versus maybe, you know, not hostile or what was not. And the final example there, A needs to be present to prevent B from bullying C.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
And have an example of something like that to show you.
Okay.
Is that making some sense?
Yes,
Yeah.
so that third one could be that I have to be at home to stop my father bullying my mother.
Yes, that's right.
Right.
And you can't really reduce that just to two-person construing, can you? Just dyadic construing. I think we generally argue, I mean, drawing from the philosopher Charles Peirce, who talked about levels of perception in this way, in these categories, and also in the family therapy literature, where a great deal is made of triangles of people, that you don't really need to go up to a fourth level, because once you've got to the third level, that's a sufficient methodology, if you like, for understanding four persons or more persons situations. But I think that's up for further research, actually. I would see that as an empirical question,
Right.
to see whether there are four-person patterns that couldn't be broken down and explained by these levels.
And you said you had an example to show.
Well, before we go on to that example, let me use something from our previous video about Mrs. Dalloway. Do you remember the Septimus and Retzia situation?
Yeah.
And I showed you a peg with Septimus, Retzia, Dr. Holmes, the doctor, who rather minimises Septimus's difficulties, saying, oh, he's just, you know, there's nothing really seriously the matter with him. And what I've done there is I've underlined in colours, the monadic is yellow, the dyadic is green, and the triadic is red.
Okay.
Okay, so examples of monadic construing is Septimus, I will kill myself. That's just about him, one person. I was indifferent. Actually, we could argue that that was maybe dyadic, as I think about it. He was indifferent to his friend Evans being killed in front of him.
Right.
I suspect that that's a feeling that he has now that is kind of just his way of tolerating the appalling trauma that involved. Other other monadic ones are Retzia sees Septimus as cowardly and selfish. Those are monadic constructs. Dr. Holmes says there's nothing the matter with him.
Right.
Septimus says of Dr. Holmes he's a damn fool. And Retzia says he's a kind man and a good man.
Right.
So they're all monadic. I'm showing this example just to show how we can use this way of classifying these levels, what I call levels of construing. So the dyadic is green. People will notice him. If he keeps saying things like the strange things he's been saying, or that he'll kill somebody and somebody overhears him, that's something about relationship with the public, maybe, or somebody that she doesn't want to hear that stuff. Dr. Holmes says to Septimus, he's just about Septimus, he's just talking nonsense to frighten. He says to him directly, you're just talking nonsense to frighten your wife. Where he got that from, I don't know, but again, it's a dyadic observation.
Right.
Septimus versus Retzia, she's taken her ring off, the marriage is over. So that's again a relational, a signal or a sign that the relationship might be coming to an end. Retzia says of herself, I would rather that he were dead. So that's something about her reaction to him. I can't stand sitting beside him. Septimus says of the doctor, I won't see him. And then remember that thing we had about once
human
you
nature,
stumble
yeah.
human nature, that's a generalized other person will sort of bully you or grind you down or something. So there's just one triadic there. And that is that Retzia reports that Dr. Holmes had said, make your husband take an interest in things outside himself.
Right.
Okay, so that's
So
Dr. Holmes giving instructions about how they should
interact. Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
Just triadic.
Okay.
Great. So just finally, we just have an example which is from an old paper that I wrote, published in 1988, about a man called Peter. Peter has been diagnosed with catatonic schizophrenia, and he's been very violent. He got admitted to hospital because he'd attacked his mother, attempting to strangle her. And I've just put this little grid here, which actually combines dyad and triad.
Right.
So there are lots of dyads, of course, in the family once you count them up, but mother-Peter relationship, Ruth-Peter relationship, Ruth is Peter's sister, and then the mother-Ruth-Peter triad.
Right, okay.
Okay, so the mother in the paper reports that he sort of got hold of me round the throat and was going to murder me, she said. Okay, so she's describing a situation between her and Peter. Ruth's description of the mother-Peter relationship is that she waits on him too much. Peter gets his mother to clean his shoes and to do menial tasks when in fact she's actually quite elderly, but he's become a kind of bully in the family.
Right.
Ruth sees her own brother-sister relationship with Peter, that she can influence him. She says, I'd say, now there's your shoes, Peter, you do it, you clean them, and he would do it. So she has some power that his mother doesn't have.
Right, okay.
Interesting comparison of two dyadic processes, or construals if you like. And then finally we've got one of these triadic situations where Ruth says, if I wasn't there, she'd go and do it for him. So she spends a lot of time saying to her mother, don't wait on him. But of course, what does she come back and say? He gets violent. If I refuse to do so, he'll get violent with me, even try to strangle me. So we're talking about the construing of quite difficult, complex problems. And my hypothesis there is that, if those kind of triadic problems don't get resolved, they can escalate.
Right.
And that is perhaps what we're talking about when people have talked about with schizophrenia, rather than just seeing it as an illness in the brain or the mind, if you like. It's an interpersonal knot that's become very difficult to unscramble. So it can escalate into psychosis, into violence.
And so your argument is that by splitting it into monadic, dyadic and triadic, you can see the complexity of the interactions between people.
It helps clarify the kind of categories that you're applying.
Right.
It also has great relevance to interviewing and intervening in a family, because you often find that they're stuck at one of these levels.
Right.
So you might get a monadic stuckness. So somebody let's say the word damn fool that came from that grid, I just regard him as an idiot, and that's the extent of it. But if you let's say you're working with two children, let's say two sisters, and one of them says, my sister's a complete idiot, and so the construing is very much just about an individual state of mind, So you might then move to, let's talk about the dyadic. So how do you two get on together? You might ask another person in the family, how do these two sit? Oh, they do argue a lot, but sometimes they're as nice as ninepence, So you're suddenly opened a door into a different level. Okay. Kelly used the term range of convenience to talk about how good a construct is for covering a particular area of concern. And we can talk about the level of convenience here with these levels,
Right.
and we can shift from one to another. It might be that to break up this difficult triadic thing, we might be able to go back to some monadic or dyadic discourse, if you like.
And so yet again, one can either do it as a grid, or you can have a conversation and afterwards work out which are monadic and which are dyadic and which are triadic.
I mean, this provides a grammar for how to steer your interview and how to understand the material. The grids, in a sense, are an add-on to that.
Right. And that's actually a very good place to stop, I think, over the course of these whole 5 videos. It's been a grammar and a way of understanding and demonstrating, I think, was the other word that we liked.
Yes, and method rather than content. You know, many psychologists just say, oh, well, you know, that's an example of this kind of process, rather than finding out what do the people themselves have to say about it.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Harry Procter, thanks very much.
Thank you.